First of all, please let me remind you that there are three states of consciousness. There is the material state of consciousness, the mental state, and the spiritual. And before the discovery by Dr. Anton Mesmer of the power of mind, the world lived mostly in the material or physical consciousness. In other words, with the exception of perhaps poets, inspired writers, or composers, and the mystics, the rest of the world was living mainly in a material state of consciousness. Only those things were real to them which you could see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. In other words, the body was real, or the farm was real. Their health was real. Vision didn't go much beyond the use of material power. People earned their living by hard labor. And as a matter of fact, we hadn't even connected with the mental world enough to bring forth labor-saving devices to any great extent. As a matter of fact, just a few years ago in touring Scotland, we saw on some farms that they hadn't put wheels on their carts. They were still having their carts dragged by a horse flat on the ground without even wheels on them. It doesn't seem that in this age that crops could be moved that way, but there are plenty of farms that move their crops on flat boards pulled by a horse without even the benefit of wheels under them. Now, this, of course, was much more true 100 years ago. They did have wheels, but very little else in the way of labor-saving devices, and living was a great physical problem. Now, with the advent of the era into which we went about 150 years ago, more began to be known of the mind. And from that time on, there has been more attention paid to the mind and mental forces and mental powers, with the result that in this last century, life has been very much easier, because a great deal of what was formerly done physically is now being done mentally. And because of the discovery of the mind, we have been able to discover laws that govern nature, laws that govern matter. And that is why we can now have automobiles, airplanes, radio, television. These laws always existed in mind, but no one had been taught to go back into mind to draw them forth. The greatest use that was made of mind before 100 years ago was to go back and bring forth literature, stories, novels, or music, but drawing forth inventions, drawing forth the laws by which we hook up all of these laws and have not only labor-saving devices but pleasurable experiences like the camera and gramophone. You see, no one will ever come to the discovery of anything through the body. You may develop your body to where you could be the champion prize fighter of the world, or you could lift up 600 pounds with it. But you will not bring forth even the idea of a sewing machine from the body. You must go into your mind. When you go into your mind, you learn the laws that apply to physical manifestation. And that is what happened something over 100 years ago. And that is why there have been more inventions in the last 150 years than in the previous 15,000 years. Because we learn to go into the mind where they are. Now, mystics go beyond the mind, and that is why the mystics do not bring forth inventions. They bring forth spiritual laws. And you will see the difference in a moment. Now, on the level of material consciousness, matter is power. And that is why, up until the era of James J. Corbett, prize fighters always became champions because they were a little taller or weighed a few more pounds or had heavier muscles than the other. And whoever could have the biggest body, the strongest body, the heaviest punching arms, he became world's champion. But there came a man named James J. Corbett who weighed about 50 pounds less than the then champion, and he went in and cut this man to ribbons to become champion. This big husky bruiser had no chance with him at all. And the reason is that James J. Corbett learned that you just don't stand up there and let a man hit you, you dance around. You weave in and out. You draw back, and just when he's going to hit you, you aren't there. And so he began to use his mind. And for quite a few years, he was champion heavyweight prize fighter of the world. And the reason was he fought the biggest of them. But they just couldn't reach him. No matter how hard they hit, he just wasn't there when the blow landed. And here was the first example in that particular field of how mind is greater than matter. How mind is greater than the power of force. Now, this shouldn't have been new, because the Master demonstrated 2,000 years ago that you shouldn't use force against an enemy, that you should not resist evil, that there are other powers. Then, as you remember, with the advent of Christian Science, it was discovered that mind had the power of healing disease, overcoming disease. There was no longer a need to apply pills or powders or plasters, no need for surgery, because there was a power of mind that could overcome the laws of matter. And of course, that really started the era of mental healing, which later evolved into spiritual healing, proving definitely that mind is a power over even that which we call matter. Then, as more and more of mind was known, it was proven that anyone can grow better crops than his neighbor if he knows the laws of mind. In one experiment, a man bought a herd of milk cows, and without changing their locale, without changing their feeding ground, without doing anything except his mental power, within 6 months he was drawing 25% more milk than his predecessor had. Same cows, same food, same pastures, just the addition of his mental powers. Then it was applied to crops, and it was found the same way. Not only that you could have more crops, but the quality would be better, because there is a power of the mind that can change the circumstances of matter. So then, the realm of mind was open to man. In due time, this resulted in studies that have resulted in psychology and psychiatry. And one of these days, psychologists and psychiatrists will discover the mistake that they made in the beginning and which is being perpetuated, and they will really do a grand work. They can't do it now because they don't know the error that is still in their basic premise. But one day they will learn it, and then you will find out that there is a far greater power in the mind than they have any idea of. They suspect it's there. In fact, I believe they know it's there. They're frustrated in knowing how to bring it forth. And that is because of just one basic error which someday they will discover. Now, throughout all of the years, the early years of Christian Science, which was followed quickly by Unity and then New Thought, really wonderful healing works took place. Not through spiritual means, although they very often used the term spiritual power, and they even spoke of God and Christ, but it really wasn't that. It was mental power. And they did some wonderful healing works on a purely mental basis. As a matter of fact, one of the mental teachers who is still functioning, Dr. Bales in the United States, was a physician, and he had stomach ulcers at a time when surgery wasn't known for stomach ulcers, or wasn't commonly used, and it just meant a long period of years of suffering ahead for this man, and he decided not to stand for it, that he would try the power of mind. And Dr. Bales cured himself of stomach ulcers purely with the power of mind. The idea of religion never entered into it. The idea of God or Christ did not enter into it. It was his use of mental powers, and mainly through affirmation. That was the mode and method that he used. And of course, Dr. Bales is a man of serious studiousness, a serious student, a dedicated man, completely a man of integrity, and there's no question about his healing and about the ministry that he started in mental healing and mental counseling. Just last year he retired from it and turned all of his centers and organizations over to the Institute of Religious Science, and he has retired just to do lecturing and teaching independently. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that we have two questions here on the subject of why do I say that affirmations are not power, or that thought is not power. And so I must make that clear to you. Just as our champion prize fighters found that their height and weight and muscle development was power, as long as nobody guessed the power of the mind and used it, but thereafter proved that all of their physical power meant nothing in the presence of a man with mind. So then, matter is power as long as somebody doesn't discover mind. When they discover mind, matter goes. In the same way, you may have a fever, you may have any form of disease, and find that there are physical remedies for it. I'm sure you know that aspirin is curing headaches and quinine is curing colds every day of the week in some part of the world. In other words, medicines do function as curative agencies. It would be a very foolish person to deny that, but this is only true on the level of those who are living purely on the basis of the body, and one form of matter replaces or displaces another form of matter, or one form of matter has power over another form of matter because the material consciousness of the individual gives it that power. Now you find that as soon as you come to those who have some inkling or idea of mental powers, that those material remedies become foolishness. As a matter of fact, they rarely work anymore. You find that they're inoperative. Why? Because now you have reached a level above where matter is power, above where matter, dead matter, can become alive something or other, and you render it powerless. But at this level, you find that a new experience has taken place. You are giving power to thoughts instead of to things. And so it is that you find a mental practitioner and one who begins to feed you with mental statements, mental truths, mental affirmations, mental suggestions, and the first thing you know, you are giving power to those thoughts. A concrete example of that is an experiment that was conducted at Harvard Medical School. They took the students in the medical school, divided them in two groups, and to this group, at night before bedtime, they gave a cup of good strong coffee, and to this group, a glass of warm milk, to see what effect it would have on their sleeping. Well, the group that took coffee, 3/4 of them couldn't sleep that night or slept very poorly. But the group that had the warm milk slept beautifully. Well, then the next night, they took the group over here and gave them a cup of black coffee, but with the caffeine removed. And over here, they gave the glass of warm milk with the caffeine inserted. But the coffee group still stayed awake and the milk group still slept. Now here's your power of mind. In the same way, last year we were in England at the end of October when their fall weather was to begin, and a newspaper reporter went to a very prominent doctor and said, now that the fall season is coming, there'll be lots of colds and grip and flu, Is there anything you could tell me that would help our readers to have a easier winter? Has there been some discovery that would make colds or grip less prevalent? Is there anything they could do at the start of the season that might help them? Oh yes, the doctor said, we have discovered a serum, and those who have an injection of it before the season begins will find that their colds and grip will be reduced by 1/3. If they've had 3 colds in a winter, they'll probably only have 2, or perhaps whatever colds they have will only be 2/3 as severe, but they will lose 1/3 of the difficulty during the winter. And the reporter said, oh, wonderful, let me have that, let me tell our people about that. Ah, yes, the doctor said, but then I must tell you the other part of it. We have also discovered that if we give them a hypodermic injection of plain water, it will also reduce their colds by 1/3. Now, how many times have you known of people in pain or suffering who have been taking morphine or some other sedative, and finally the doctor felt they might be getting too much and began to give them plain water injections, and it reduced the pain just as much? In other words, we have evidence through mental healing, through such experiments as I've said in Harvard, through this doctor's discovery, that the mind does play a tremendous part in governing one's life. What one accepts in the mind, whether or not it's true, acts on them. And so it is that in this last century we have developed a knowledge of the mind that had never been known for 15,000 years before, with a few exceptions. I'll speak of those exceptions later. Now, here we have an entirely new discovery. Not only matter is power, but now we have a discovery that thought is power, mind is power. And we have quite a bit of proof that it is true. But since the power of matter can be used for good or evil, it cannot be of God. The power of God can never be used for evil. That was the whole function of the Master. He came to earth to prove that the power of God is healing, feeding, redeeming, saving, so forth. Never destructive. There's no place in the New Testament where the Master shows forth any destructive nature of God. So we know then that if anything has the power of both good and evil, that it must be on the human level of life. So we know that many disease germs are now used to cure disease. We know that venom from reptiles is used for curative purposes. In other words, you can use evil for good and you can use good for evil. You can take the very electricity that gives us our warmth and our cold and our lights and all of the great conveniences and luxuries of life, and you can take that same electricity and kill a man with it. So that everything of a material nature can be used for either good or evil, therefore it is not of God. And this is what we have proved on the mental level. You can use the power of thought for good, but you can also use it for evil. In the earliest days of Mrs. Eddy's practice, she never dreamed of such a thing as an evil in mental practice. It was wholly a healing and curative art. But some of her students discovered that you could use the power of thought for evil purposes. And they did it. They used it to make their patients give them money to which they weren't entitled. They did it to conduct affairs with students who ordinarily would never have been guilty of such a thing. In other words, they used the power of thought for evil. In fact, they even proved that they could reverse a healing with the power of thought. And so it was that Mrs. Eddy wrote the chapter which later became famous on demonology, warning people that if you subjected yourself to the power of mind, do not be surprised if it is used for evil purposes. And in that she made the statement, the day is coming when the thief will not have to enter your house to rob you. You will deliver your goods to him. Well, of course, people thought that was pretty ridiculous, but her students were already proving that was true. They were just making patients bring money to them that they had no right to, and here 3 years ago it was again proven in these experiments on television and radio that they could make you, while you were sitting at your television or while you were sitting at a moving picture theater, they could make you get up and go out and buy the product they wanted you to buy, and you didn't even want it. You didn't even want it, but all of a sudden you got out of your seat, you went downstairs and bought it. They made you do it with the power of mind. And that's evil, because it wasn't a product that's necessary for your good. It wasn't a product that you had any choice or decision about. It was you had to obey their will. Now, I could go on for hours and hours and hours and show you illustrations of how the power of mind can be used for good or it can be used for evil. You know that during the war, soldiers who were imprisoned often had the power of mind used on them to make them divulge secrets. You know now that there is a brainwashing process which can make people do anything that is wanted of them. In other words, we now know that the power of mind is not God, because it can be used for good or for evil. And even when it's used for good, it isn't any more God than the piece of matter that can be used for good. So that up to this point, if there were only a world of matter or only a world of mind, you wouldn't be in too safe a position in the world, because with all of the good that can be done with the mind, it's the people who want to do evil with it who have the most energy. Don't ever forget that. The people who want to make money, the people who want power, the people who want position, they'll sit up all night mentalizing to get it. Very difficult thing to get a person even to use affirmations to heal themselves. So that we would be in a sad position in the world if there were only a world of matter or only a world of mind. But the point that I want you to see now is that matter is power on a material level of consciousness, and also that thought is power on a mental level of consciousness, but neither of these are power on the spiritual level of consciousness, because on the spiritual level of consciousness nothing is power but spirit. In other words, on the whole, through our attaining some measure of spiritual consciousness, we prevent these laws of mind and matter operating on us. In other words, we prevent 80% of the diseases ever touching us, and then we heal most of the other 20 that do touch us. In the same way, families who are following the metaphysical paths of life, according to the records, their children only average 20% of the absences from school for sickness of the non-metaphysical family children. Again, of the families who live by metaphysical principles, it would be practically impossible to find an alcoholic in those families, and so far I have never even come across one in prison. In other words, families who are governed, even where only one or two members of the family really seriously follow the spiritual or metaphysical way of life, it keeps their home pure. They demonstrate that none of these evils of this world shall come nigh my dwelling place. And so you will not find alcoholics in metaphysical families or drug addicts. You will not find the members of their family in prison. It must be a rare experience. And you find the percentage of disease is less than 20% of that of a normal household, and it is not unusual to find, and remember I'm giving you the benefit of over 30 years experience, it is not unusual to find households that have operated for 20 and 25 years without a drop of medicine in them. And so you can see that as you attain even a grain of spiritual consciousness, you find that the forces that operate materially and mentally no longer touch you to that extent. We are not 100% free because we are not yet enabled to live 100% in our spiritual vision. In other words, as soon as one of us catches a grain of this, he's out in the world helping others with their problems, and he's not concerning himself with really abstaining 100% from this world. And so it is that even though we sometimes have an experience, those who met me at the plane saw the difficulty I was in when we landed. And but I know the rest of you would never dream of the fact that under ordinary circumstances nobody could have carried on this program in the shape I was in when I landed. And by morning it had been worked out so completely that it was possible to continue this work. And that's what I mean, that once in a while you may be overtaken with a cold or with something that hits you from the world, but you'll find, first of all, that it's very seldom. It's a rarity. And then secondly, that when it does happen, you have the means whereby you quickly pull yourself out of it. So it is then that let us acknowledge that neither matter nor mind have power as long as you have reached the consciousness of oneness. When you reach even a grain of understanding that since God is spirit, the only power there is in spiritual law, then you do not fight matter, you do not fight mind, you don't run around protecting yourself from evil thoughts. You realize the impotent nature of mental thoughts, and then what happens is those who believe in the power of matter and those who believe in the power of mind pay the penalty for it. they pay the penalty for it, just as in the example in Scripture of Sapphira and Nicodemus. After the crucifixion of the Master, when the disciples were all being persecuted and driven underground, they couldn't even carry on their ordinary means of livelihood to support their families. And so they agreed to form a communal society. And each one was to put into it all that they had. And then the whole of the disciples and apostles and their families and all could draw on this common fund to live until such time as the period of persecution would be past. Well, they all met to put everything they had into this common fund, but Sapphira and her husband decided to keep a little bit in the back pocket. And through his awareness, Peter discerned this. And he told them that he discerned it. But he didn't get angry about it. He just told them, you haven't done this to man. You've done this to God. This isn't aimed at us. We won't suffer by this. You're holding out on God, not on us. And they both dropped dead. In other words, their own belief in matter, the power of matter, the power of money, the lying, the benefit of lying, the benefit of cheating, their own belief in it destroyed them. And it certainly didn't hurt the disciples or their people, because they were taken care of. So it is when you begin to realize that no weapon that is formed against thee can prosper. But you must know why, otherwise it will prosper. You must know why it won't prosper. It hasn't any power. It isn't that you are better than anybody else. It isn't that there is some God taking care of you that isn't taking care of somebody else. It has to do with your knowing the truth. And the truth is, spirit being infinite is the only power. And neither matter nor mind is power. And therefore, you don't protect yourself, you don't cheat, lie, defraud in order that, with the idea of benefiting yourself. You remain pure. To the pure, all things are pure. And as long as you are abiding in the fact that spirit being infinite, spirit is your supply. You don't have to lie or cheat or defraud for it. You don't have to falsely advertise for it. Just perform your normal, natural functions of living, business, industry, whatever you're in, and depend on the fact that spirit is your business. Spirit is the substance and activity of your business. Spirit is the meat, bread, wine, and water unto your life. Spiritual law is the only law that's functioning in your experience. Abide in that and then do everything to the highest level of your integrity, and you will find that your good will be taken care of, and that no weapon that is formed against thee can prosper unless you believe it's a weapon with power. If you can understand that it is a cause causeless, if you can see that it is the arm of flesh, it will drop right in front of you and prove itself of no power. And all of this time, remember, matter is being a power unto those of material consciousness, and thoughts are being power unto those of mental consciousness. And only when you rise into the realization of oneness, which is the basic principle of the infinite way, never using one power over another. Don't use the power of mind, and don't even use the power of God. Just don't use power. Recognize the powerlessness of what is appearing to you as evil, whether it is a person, whether it is a thing, whether it is a condition. Your immunity lies in your realization that the only power there actually is a spiritual power. And it can't be used for good and it can't be used for evil. It just can't be used. It is a state of omnipresent being, and you're always in it. So you don't have to use it. You have only to know it. You shall know the truth. The truth will make you free. And when you're knowing the truth, look at the paralyzed man and say, what did hinder you? Don't try to bring some power there to heal him. Just what did hinder you? What power is there but spiritual power? To the blind, what power is there but spiritual power? And so, in every way, you will find that what has had power over you heretofore will lose its power, gradually fade away, and you will find that you'll be free. And that you won't be free because there's some God that likes our religion better than the other fellow's religion. You're not free because we know how to use God. You're free because you've learned the truth which was revealed in the Master's teaching. And that is, there's only one power, and I, the Father within me, is that power. And I don't have to use it. I merely have to know, and then let it perform its function. I said that there were some ancient teachings that knew the power of mind. You have an example of that right here in the Maoris, the original Polynesian people. And it is likewise true in Australia with the Aborigines. I would like you to know that they knew more about mind than Duke University does. They know more about mind than any university that's existing on the face of the earth today. And they demonstrated it and proved it. They could heal with the power of the mind, and they could kill with the power of the mind, and that's about the two opposite extremes. And not only that, they could know things taking place at a distance. They were sufficiently in tune in mind so that what one became aware of, this fellow down here did, and then the one at the next post and the next post, so that by the time they were through, everybody around the island knew what was taking place. All of that, of course, was not through studied knowledge. It was through intuitive knowledge that they built up in their way of life. And that is why in Australia, in the Hawaiian Islands, in Central and South America, in Africa, there always have been people called medicine men or kahunas, or by whatever title their language used, who had the power of doing good and they had the power of doing evil, and the only reason is that they knew the power of mind and how to use it, how to direct it. The people today who are doing the greatest experimenting with the powers of mind, of course, are the advertising world. And they are devoting way into the millions and millions of dollars every year to discovering how to hypnotize the public and control them. And of course, they won't succeed. You don't ever have to worry about their succeeding, because I'll tell you something they don't know. It only takes one person to upset their whole apple cart. One person who knows that mind isn't power, and they just can't operate anymore, and they don't know why. All you have to do is stand fast in your understanding that there is only one power, and it's spiritual power. And they won't get to first base with their operations. It is true that they could succeed if we hadn't entered the period of the world where spiritual power has been revealed. And that is this particular era, the middle of the 20th century, where we know that spiritual power means non-power. And the realization that all the things that the world calls power isn't power. And all you have to do is stand fast in that. All you have to do is abide in that. You don't have to tell it. You don't have to write it to anyone. You don't have to convey it to anyone. Keep it locked up inside of your being. And you'll see the frustration of all those efforts to hypnotize, suggestionize, to capture. The mind can't be captured. The mind of man can't be captured. If there are 10 righteous men in a city, if there are just 2 or more who are abiding in the truth, no weapon that is formed against this world can prosper, because no matter how many weapons you form, they're clouds without rain. They're temporal power, or the arm of flesh, and then watch them drop. They were effective in the days when nobody in the world knew that matter wasn't power or mind wasn't power. They can't be effective now. And you'll watch how many times you will frustrate the attempts of. Doesn't make any difference whether it's on the political level, business level, any level where an attempt will be made to capture the mind. You will frustrate it just by inwardly, silently, joyously remembering there's only one law, there's only one power, and none of these weapons can by any means prosper, because they aren't power. Why aren't they power? They're not ordained of God. Only that which is ordained of God is power. Only that which has a law of God behind it is power. You'd be surprised how much healing work is done just by knowing one principle, that there is no law of disease. Now, if God is the only lawgiver, is there a law of disease? Can you imagine God giving a law of disease? Can you imagine God creating people and then saying, now I'll make a nice law of disease to kill them with? I'll create them, but I don't want them to be happy, so we'll give them a nice juicy disease. Oh no. God has never empowered disease, and God has never created a law of disease, and God is the only creative principle. Therefore, if we're suffering from a law of disease, it is a man-made law which we have accepted, instead of smiling and saying, I know thee. Nothing to it. Thou couldst have no power over me. No weapon that is formed against me can prosper, for no weapon has been ordained of God. No weapon. Do you know what the promise of Scripture is? God is fulfillment. I am come that ye might be fulfilled. I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have it more abundantly. No sign of disease in that. No sign of death in that. Oh no, this I has never empowered a disease. If God empowered a disease, none of us could ever heal it. And I don't believe doctors could either. Whatever diseases they heal, it's only because God doesn't want it to continue. God is not responsible for it. It has no function in life. But ye must know this truth in order for this truth to make you free. You must always live in the consciousness of, I will not fear what mortal man can do to me. I will not fear what mortal conditions can do to me. Fear not, I am with thee. Fear not, I will never leave thee. And that's enough to keep us immune to these tragedies of the world. And as I said, once in a while we do come under world belief, but oh, how quickly we throw it off in the realization that we're not going to fight it, we're not going to battle it as if it were an evil. We're going to know the truth about it. Since it isn't ordained of God, it has nothing to do with us. Now this has to do with the same subject of the mind. Demons, evil spirits. This all operates on the mental level. And of course, nobody knows how to deal with this except those who can understand that anything that is of the human mind, the carnal mind, the mortal mind, is not power. They're the only ones. That is why a great deal of my work consists of helping those who have been trapped on the occult level of life and are finding themselves influenced by evil spirits from beyond. You may wonder if there are such things. It doesn't make any difference whether there are or not. There are people suffering from them. That's what counts. And there is nobody who knows how to help them or free them. No one on this human level. Only in our work have we discovered the remedy for it. And that's why so much of it is given to us. People who work either with spiritualism or with the occult sciences sometimes find themselves trapped on the evil side of it. Some never do. Some find themselves always in the company of good spirits. But there are those who don't. And when they're trapped, they have no way out. They're in for a bad time. But with our work has come the revelation of how to free them. And that is through this same principle, that mind and its operations is not power. There is no such thing as a control of one individual over another if the Spirit is the only presence and the only power. And so by not battling those conditions and not trying to get the patient to do something which they're helpless to do, we sit quietly by in the realization, I shall not be moved. None of these things move me. I cannot accept a power apart from God, a presence apart from God. I cannot accept a substance, law, or activity apart from God. And since God is Spirit, all power is spiritual. And then by abiding steadfastly in that, we free these people from the demons and anything else that may be in control of them. Actually, this is also our remedy in cases of insanity. Regardless of the degree of insanity, our record of healing is a marvelous one. Our degree of healing is a marvelous one. And for the same reason. We are never trying to change the patient or make them understand or anything of that kind, because you can't do it that way. You can't do it through frontal attack. But if you, in your silence, in your meditations, will only realize that the mind that was in Christ Jesus is a spiritual mind, and it is the only mind of power, you will find that any other sense of mind will begin to dissolve. But you must stand fast. You must ignore the appearance. Don't try to change it, but go within yourself and realize the mind that was in Christ Jesus was an infinite mind. Therefore, there can't be two minds. And that mind, then, the spiritual mind, is the mind of power, and everything else is just illusion or a false sense. Now, would you please illustrate one point from your story of the tuberculosis patient in The Art of Spiritual Healing? Would there not have been a close relationship between you and the person as person while you were arriving at the requisite state of consciousness? I hope this will be the answer for you. I never knew that person. I don't know who they were or anything about them until after 13 months, when they came from the institution completely and perfectly healed. Was the first time I ever set eyes on them or knew what they looked like or who they were or anything about them. So that, so far as any personal close relationship, there could have been none. That there was a spiritual bond is evident, but that always takes place the very moment you reach out to anyone for help spiritually. You are entering a spiritual relationship with them. And that is why you will find on the front of every Infinite Way book and booklet that passage, that there is a spiritual bond that unites each one of us in this work. There is, because we have brought ourselves to each other, and we have united ourselves in a bond of love. There's nothing personal about it. There's no human obligations about it. It is a spiritual bond of giving and receiving, receiving and giving. And the teacher or the practitioner is always giving and sharing and pouring out. The student is receiving, but the student is also giving, pouring out, sharing. There's a reciprocity always between the practitioner and the patient, between the teacher and the student. But it is of a spiritual and a pure nature, and nothing in the nature of an obligation goes with it. Nothing in the nature of a personal sense goes with it. And each maintains their own human relationship, and yet there is a bond of spiritual love. And those of you who have been with this work very long, you have already discovered what it means. The rest of you will discover what it means when you find that you're living an entirely different kind of a life, and that even though our students aren't physically present with you, you are actually present with us, and you're feeling our presence with you, and yet in no human sense. I'm asked the question here. The lesson to Sam is naturally used for children, and tremendously so, and I'm asked if we have anything else for children. Yes. In the books, the Infinite Way Letters, 1955 and 1956, you will find a series of articles for children, and there is a tape for children, and as soon as we get back to Hawaii, we are mailing that tape here to Mrs. Smith, so that the tape will be available in your tape groups, and for those of you who have the lessons, the letters, Infinite Way Letters, 1955 and 6, will find these articles for children. And incidentally, if you continue the study of the Infinite Way, gradually add to your library the Infinite Way letters 1954, 55, 56, 57, 58, and 59, because these are my deepest teachings to the advanced students. In other words, in my monthly letter, every month, I give the highest and best that I've got, because it is only our very serious students who subscribe for those letters. Out of hundreds of thousands of Infinite Way books in the world, there are only 5,000 families receiving that letter. So you know that that's the hard core of our very serious students. And to those I owe the highest obligation to see to it that they get every single bit of spiritual instruction possible. And so those are among the most valuable things that we have, because at the end of each year our monthly letters are published in book form. And this month, incidentally, the Infinite Way letters 1959 are being released. It will be at least a year before 1960 is released. I have become interested in the Infinite Way teachings. Please, could you tell me if I still continue to say the Lord's Prayer and give praise and thanks to God for His goodness? Indeed, in the Infinite Way you do not give up anything. You never give up anything in the Infinite Way, but as you continue studying, things have a different meaning to you. And even the Lord's Prayer will have a different meaning to you, but there isn't any occasion ever to give it up. And as far as praise and thanks, let me tell you that no matter how much you're doing it, you'll do it 10 times more when you're an Infinite Way student. Because if there is any one thing that may be said to be an underlying way of life within us, it is thanks and gratitude.